Hello my lovely bookish friends and welcome back to another video. I'm just going to apologise now for the really bad lighting. It is a horribly dark day and I was testing out different lighting and stuff and nothing was working, so this is kind of the best setup that I could do. So sorry about that. So in this video I'm going to go through the books that I read this November, and honestly this month's been kind of a weird reading month where I actually felt like I hadn't read much, but then I've looked back and it's gone, actually I've read a decent amount. But I feel like I've just read books slower this month than I normally do. Often when I get into reading I'll just go into a phase where I'm just like picking up books and just like going through them quickly. But this month it has just been really, I feel like I've took my time with books. I've just been reading a bit more here and there, not always getting a chance to sit down and just read as much, which has been fine because I've been doing like a lot of writing, it was nano and stuff like that. So I did read and I did get through stuff. It was slower than usual, so it felt a bit weird. But I have enjoyed the books that I've read this month, and I delved into the world of dark academia a little bit, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. So without further ado, let's get to the books.
The first book that I read was If We Were Villains by L.M. Rio. Now this follows the story of Oliver, who is studying Shakespeare at this kind of elite drama school, where he realises that his classmates seem to play the same roles on stage as off, though he has always been doomed to play the secondary character in someone else's story. However, when the teachers change up the casting, good-natured rivalry turns ugly, and the play spins dangerously into real life. And when one of 7 friends is found dead, the group find themselves facing the greatest acting challenge yet, convincing the police and themselves that they are innocent. Now, I did a reading vlog on this book because I absolutely loved it. This was my first sort of dark academia book that I read, and I thoroughly enjoyed this one. I think a lot of the reason why I loved it so much was because I actually studied theatre. This is what I did for my uni degree, and my master's degree was all in theatre. So all the Shakespeare references, all the little details that go into when they're doing their first like run-throughs and stuff like that of the play, I just really loved it. It just brought back memories, but obviously without like the murder and all that sort of stuff. But I just loved all the Shakespeare references. I just really enjoyed it overall. It is one of those books where I actually guessed the plot twist quite early on, but it didn't ruin it for me. So I still really enjoyed it. I highly recommend checking this one out if you want to get into dark academia, and especially if you like Shakespeare, because there is a lot of Shakespeare in this. They literally speak it as a language half the time. They're literally talking about Shakespeare all the time, and there's things make a little bit more sense, especially the ending, if you know what it's referencing to. I will say that, but you can read it if you haven't read Shakespeare as well, and you'll still enjoy it because it's just also a good sort of mystery in there and a bit of a thriller as well to see who did the murder and all that. Next up we have Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. Now this is set in a world where witches, demons and vampires all kind of coexist within this human world, and it follows the story of Diana, who is a witch and also a professor at Oxford, and she pulls out from the library this mysterious magical manuscript that no one in the kind of magical world has seen for centuries. And in doing so, she sparks a series of events of all these different creatures trying to get this manuscript, including this vampire called Matthew. And that's kind of a very basic synopsis of what this book's about, but I'll sort of leave it at that, and because I went into it not knowing pretty much any more than that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it actually. It's kind of dubbed as a adult version of Twilight, but it is how do I put this nicely? It's so much kind of more than Twilight, where it's like the love story is obviously a very big feature of it, and in some ways the love story did feel a little bit quick, but it kind of makes sense in the world of the story. However, it was very academic, and that was one of the things that I actually really liked about it. It felt very dark academia, and also like it just didn't feel, even though it was a romance book, it kind of didn't feel just just romance, if that makes sense, because I'm not a big fan of the romance genre as a whole, but in this book it was nicely mixed in with sort of the magic and the dark academia, and I just actually thoroughly enjoyed it, and I do want to read the rest of the series, and also I really want to check out the TV series as well. Next up, we have Under the Whispering Door by T.J. Klune. Now, this follows the story of Wallace, who dies and then ends up at this tea shop, which is sort of like this crossover point for spirits to move on to the next place. And when he's there, he starts to realise all the things he sort of missed out on in life. And I'm just going to read you this little bit from the dust jacket, which quite nicely sums it up. It says, Under the Whispering Door is an uplifting story about a life spent at the office and a death spent building a home. And that kind of quite nicely sums up what this book is about. Honestly, this book is so beautifully written. It's actually one of the first books that I decided to annotate. I've never really done that before, but I got some of the like clear, transparent sticky notes, and I just underlined a few bits of the story because honestly, there was just some really touching lines, and it was just beautifully bittersweet. Is quite how I would kind of sort of sum up this book. The author is also the writer of The House on the Cerulean Tree, which I read last year and absolutely adored. I really enjoyed that, and I think that one may still be my favourite, but this book has got some very sort of similar vibes to that, in that it's a wholesome, sort of feel-good book which has some really lovely, I just know, it feels like a warm hug is kind of what I want to feel like these books are like. And this one touches on a lot of like life point. I don't know how to explain it. It just touches on things that sort of hit home, and it's just a really beautiful story. So I highly recommend checking this one out. The next book is another dark academia novel, and it is The Maidens. And this is a book which is about this therapist called Miranda, who is drawn back to Cambridge University, where she went to uni, to sort of investigate this elusive society called the Maidens, who are this sort of secret set, group of bright students who are all sort of led and have these private sessions with this charismatic professor of Greek tragedy. And when members of this group are murdered, Miranda sort of goes back to the uni and is trying to find out what happened. That's kind of quite a basic synopsis of it again. It's kind of one. Honestly, this book wasn't my favourite. Like, it was a very quick read, and it was nicely paced, and it's going to sound weird, but like, it would make a really good film because it's quite intense and fastly paced. But there's just something about it that made it so that I didn't enjoy it as much as some of the other dark academia books that I read this month. However, it's still enjoyable, and like I said, it's very fastly paced. I read this in one sitting. So it was worth the read, and it's definitely one for any thriller fans out there, because this is definitely the type of dark academia book for you. Next up, we have Ace of Spades. Now, I was very much doing a dark academia book month in November, so this is another one in that genre, but this one is a YA book, and it follows these two students at this sort of elite private school who are being targeted by this anonymous texter who is spreading all their sort of dark secrets across the school. And this book was intense. Now, it's a YA book, but it is one that delves deep into the heart of institutional racism, which is a very obviously heavy topic, so this may not be suitable for everybody, but it is such an intense and deep read, which I know sounds a bit weird, but it really was. It was also a thriller, and it just each time made me like shocked, and I just didn't know what was coming next, and there was just twist after twist after twist. And also it really made you think about sort of institutional racism and stuff like that. It did a really good job at sort of hitting this topic hard and sort of in your face, and it did a really good job of it, and it definitely deserves all the awards that it's got. Moving away from dark academia, we have a short story, a novella called A Holiday by Gaslight, and this is set in Victorian England, and it follows this sort of pair, Ned and Sophia. Was it Sophie? Sophie or Sophia, who are courting, and then she sort of realizes that they don't really have anything in common, so she sort of breaks it off. But then there's this holiday party at her family's manor, and he's there too, and they sort of give themselves a week to try and get to know each other and decide whether or not it's sort of worth it for them to keep courting. And it's such a cute story. It reads quite a bit like, it seems quite heavily inspired by North and South, and the characters are quite similar to that novel. And I just loved it. It was so quick and easy to read. I read it in one sitting, and literally like an hour and a half I read it, and it was just very enjoyable, got me in the holiday spirit, and yeah, I highly recommend giving it a go. And finally we have A Forest of Wool and Steel. Now, this book is honestly just such a sweet story and just a really great and easy one to read. It literally just follows this guy who, when he's 17 at school, he sees this piano tuner fixing the piano at their school. And this sort of makes him realise that he really likes the pianos and he really wants to become a good piano tuner. And that is literally what the whole book is about. If you're looking for something that is plot heavy, this isn't it. If you want something that is just quite wholesome and heartfelt, this is the book to read. It is literally just about this guy as he goes along training and becoming a piano tuner, and it has some absolutely beautiful lines all about like piano and how music and just how he sort of sees the piano and its music. It's kind of hard to explain it without making it sound really boring. But honestly, it's just a really sweet, quite wholesome story. It kind of reads a bit like a Ghibli movie. So if you like Studio Ghibli, this is kind of a book that I think you would like as well. Because honestly, I could see it being a Studio Ghibli or like an anime movie, because it is just such a nice, simple story about this guy tuning pianos. But honestly, it's so lovely and I really, really have enjoyed it. It was a really good book to read after some of the heavier dark academia books.
So that was it for my November wrap up. On top of those books, I'm also still currently listening to the audiobook of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I am so close to finishing this audiobook. Now, if you've seen some of my other videos, you know I've had Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the actual physical books here. I've had this on my bookshelf for 7 years since the TV series came out, and I have been desperate to get this finished because I keep starting it and stopping it, and there's nothing wrong with the book, it's just there's a lot to the book, you know, it's a chunky book, and so I've never been able to finish it. So I started listening to the audiobook, and the narrator is just brilliant and I'm thoroughly enjoying it, and I'm so close to the end, so I really do want to try and get that book read. As for my TBR for December, I still haven't read most of the books that are on my TBR list for the entire year, so I shall just have to, honestly, I've already come to sort of the realization, the conclusion if you like, that I'm not going to get that TBR list read. There's no way I'm going to be able to read all the books that are on that list before the end of 2022. I wasn't prepared enough, I didn't think it through, whatever. I just didn't. I just got distracted with other books, so I just didn't read these books. There's nothing wrong with them, I just haven't read them, and so I now need to sort of decide which books I can actually read this year and which books will just roll over to my TBR list for next year. I feel like I'm going to be more prepared and try and read one book off the list each month, because the thing is, these are just books that I own a copy of, or you know, I know someone who owns a copy of that I wanted to read, not books that were new releases and stuff like that. And they're the type of books that I get distracted with, or I keep seeing a book on Instagram and I get it from the library and I just get distracted. So next year my plan is to try and read like one book off this TBR a month, and hopefully I will get to the end of next year and be like, yeah, I successfully read all my books off my TBR, because I am not this year, and I don't think I will. I would though really like to read Song of Achilles, because I know that is such a popular and beloved book, so I would really like to get to that one. That is my aim for December. And then on top of that, I would like to read some festive or wintry books as well. Like I normally always reread Christmas Carol because it's short and it's the pure essence of a Christmas book, that book. It's the classic. And then I actually would really like to read Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, because the next and last season of his Dark Materials is going to be out. So I'd kind of want to read the books because I've not read them before. So I'd quite like to read the books before I watch the series, but I don't know if I'll just have to like delay watching the series and read the books first, or whether that'll work, but I'm going to try anyway. So that brings us to the end of this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I have a lot more bookish content to come, so please stay tuned. And I also hope to have a bit of festive content for this upcoming festive season. So, until next time, my lovely bookish friends. Bye!